Thank you so much. Appreciate your testimony of all of you. I'd like to begin with the Yavapai-Apache Nation Water Rights Settlement, and I want to direct my first question to you, Mr. Cameron. Under the bill, approximately $1.04 billion in mandatory funding, $731 million plus for the Craig and Verity pipeline, $152 plus million for the nation's drinking water system, and approximately $156 million in additional trust accounts. Interior states that these two principal projects are supported only by less than feasibility estimates, and has warned that similar estimates have resulted in substantial cost overruns. The bill also indexes authorized amounts for cost fluctuations and unforeseen market volatility. Can you share with the committee what level of engineering or design has been completed for the Craig and Verity pipeline and the Yavapai-Apache Nation's drinking water system? And what's the expected range of uncertainty in these estimates?
As is often the case when we move ahead with water rights settlements based on an appraisal level study as opposed to a full-blown feasibility study, the cost is typically dramatically underestimated. So one of our concerns is that if the Congress were to move ahead with this bill and also Agua Caliente, in the absence of a feasibility study, both the committee and the administration and the tribes would find out several years from now that we significantly underestimated what the costs were to the United States.
So it's basically they need additional feasibility work to get a more reliable estimate of the cost?
Exactly. So there are no surprises on the part of anyone.
Okay. Let me ask then about the pipeline capacity. Interior states that the required pipeline capacity for the pipeline exceeds the water right claims by nearly 40%. The legislation would require capacity for at least 6,836.92 acre feet annually for the nation, and up to 1,912 acre feet for county communities. So how much of the additional capacity benefits for non-tribal users rather than the nation? And can you give the committee the quantity claimed by the United States, the quantity quantified for the nation under the settlement, and the proposed design capacity? I know that these are all more technical, but if you have those details, I think the committee would appreciate those.
Okay. I'll have to get back to you on the precise numbers there, Madam Chairman. What we certainly can say is that our initial estimate is approximately 40% of the benefits of the pipeline would go to non-Indians, and that begs the question: shouldn't there be cost sharing from those non-Indian parties if the project were to move ahead as originally sized? And that's a significant question. Again, absent a feasibility study, it's hard to put particular numbers either on that percentage. Is it really 38%? Is it really 47%? So our best estimate right now is 40% over design. But if we had a feasibility study, we'd have more clarity.
Well, and I appreciate that. But as much of that detail as you can provide us, I think that would be helpful as you gain it. And then from the federal perspective, why is this settlement such a big deal, really? And you mentioned perhaps the need for a cost share. What specific pipeline costs should local users pay, and what level of commitment would satisfy the department here?
As a general principle, in reclamation law, people who benefit from water or power should be paying the Treasury back for the Treasury's investment in that water and power. So to the extent there are non-Indian parties who would benefit from part of the cost of this project, the expectation would be that they would be repaying the Treasury over time for the benefits that they receive, as is true of all reclamation projects as a general rule across the country.
So, Chairman, I've got a couple questions for you on this, but my 5 minutes has expired, so I'll turn to the Vice Chair.
Thank you, Chair Murkowski. Secretary Cameron, quick first question. So you do this sort of preliminary assessment, and it's basically, it always comes in low, and then you do the feasibility study, and it's always more than that. Is that pretty fair to say?
That's a pretty accurate generalization.
Okay, so how come? Like that doesn't seem like something that we should accept as though it's like a statute or the weather. Can't you change your internal process so it's not reliably coming in under and therefore kind of a not particularly useful number?
It largely depends upon the way the work is conducted. At an appraisal level, it's almost, at the risk of oversimplifying, a desktop exercise, whereas at the feasibility level, you are walking the ground, you're doing geophysical and geological explorations, you're doing soil testing.
But like in other sort of capital improvements projects, you have contingency to, right, you get like, for instance, in the Honolulu area rapid transit project, you just have a 30% contingency because between inflation, supply chain shocks, time value of money, all the rest of it, it's going to be more. Like, why can't we at least have some little equation that sort of gets this thing closer to where we all know it's going to be so that the number that we get given is closer to the number?
Right. You raised a good point. It's building in management and contingencies is a standard practice in project management.
Is it a standard practice for you guys?
I can't tell you what the percentage that we normally you use off the top of my head.
You get the question, right?
I get the question.
Can we work together? Because I just don't like. I know it's not the main thing. The main thing is the money. But if we're trying to figure out how much money you need, and you come in and say it's 1.2, and then it ends up reliably being 1.9, then that seems like something we ought to be able to fix. And that's not a criticism about inflation or supply chain risks. That's just you give us a number, we want to be able to rely upon it. And we have to go and advocate to appropriators that this will get this thing done. And if it's really just 2/3 of the money, then we lose our credibility. Okay, so let me move on from that. In March, you testified that the current funding is not adequate to complete the enacted settlements, much less pay for the 16 pending before Congress right now. I'm considering a bill that would authorize new mandatory funding for settlements that could be used by either BOR or BIA. Would such a solution help Interior to pay for the settlements?
As a general principle, the administration prefers to pay for settlements through discretionary appropriations. We feel that gives both the executive branch and the Congress more control on an annual basis in response to the actual on-the-ground funding needs. But we are obviously happy to implement any statute that the Congress chooses to enact.
Several members of this committee have proposed ways to pay for Indian water rights settlements, but this administration has not really responded in writing, either with TA or sort of even policy advice on Senator Lujan's bill, the one that I'm considering. And I'm wondering if you can work with our teams, because this is clearly a broken system. I mean, the estimating's wrong, we're way short, and then it's not as though you save money by shorting projects. You know this, right? If a project can't be completed, then the time value of money and inflation, and then you just end up with lots of difficulty. It is not cheaper to only partially fund a project. I get the idea of Congress having sort of a tactile control over which projects get funded. I understand that piece, and I get that some of these costs, the variation of costs is inevitable. But I think this is a broken system, and I'm hoping you can give us some TA on, I don't care if it's my good friend Senator Lujan's bill or mine or anyone else's, but like we've got to normalize this so it's not goofy, where you sort of have to do politics to get a water rights settlement funded. And sometimes you get them funded, sometimes you don't. Sometimes there's a requirement for a pay for, sometimes there's not. Like this is no way to run a railroad, especially since these are obligations that we have under treaties.
Yeah, I agree with you, Senator. There's got to be a better way to do this, and we would very much look forward to working with you and the chairman and Senator Lujan and other colleagues to figure out a smarter way to manage these things going forward. We owe it to you and to the tribes and the American people to do a more reliable estimate. And as you indicated, the longer these things drag out, the higher the price tag on the projects becomes. So coming up with a right estimate the first time and expeditiously funding it is in everybody's best interest.
Thank you.
Thank you, Senator Schatz, and thank you for raising that. We had a hearing previously this year on water settlement, and I think kind of the conclusion of that, and I'm looking at my friend from New Mexico here, was we've got an obligation to address these. Right now, we don't have a lot of good answers in terms of how we're paying for them. I happen to be the chairman of the Interior Appropriations Committee as well, and believe me, when we're talking about what this means for our accounts, $13 billion is kind of eye-popping when you're looking at it from the perspective of where you find that within the budget. So this is a hearing that is specific to a handful of these water settlements, but I think you are correct in pointing out that we have a bigger structural flaw that we're trying to wrestle to the ground here. Senator Rounds.
Thank you, Madam Chair. And once again, welcome to our panelists. Three of you are off the hook with me. All of my questions are for Mr. Cameron. And they are along the same lines as Co-Chair Schatz has with regard to some other projects. These are items that I offered. I think my team has sent you the list of questions that I had today just so that you would be prepared or at least have the opportunity, Mr. Cameron, to be able to respond. Mr. Cameron, as you know, the water investment in northern South Dakota project, it's called the WINS project, is absolutely vital to Aberdeen and the surrounding area. Funding for Phase 2 was included in the FY26 Energy and Water Development Bill. While I appreciate the progress made so far, I remain concerned about the pace that the Bureau of Reclamation has taken to obligate construction funds. Can you provide an update on when Reclamation expects to obligate construction funds?
Yes, Senator. I'm happy to report that we are actually on schedule. In fact, maybe a little bit ahead of the planned schedule. And so I'm glad to be able to give you a little bit of good news today.
Excellent. Would you also be able to provide us with what that schedule looks like if I ask for it in a QFR, please?
Absolutely, sir.
Okay, we'll ask specifically for that, and it sounds like we should be able to get that back in terms of dates and for expectations.
Yes, sir.
Thank you. Also, Mr. Cameron, earlier this year I introduced the Dakota Mainstem Water Supply Project Feasibility Study Act, which would authorize a feasibility study for the Dakota Mainstem Regional Water System. I've also co-sponsored legislation that would authorize feasibility studies for the Western Dakota Regional Water System and the Lewis and Clark Regional Water System. During the Senate Energy and Natural Resources Committee markup of these bills, provisions were added to each bill that requires Reclamation to identify sources of available appropriated funds to pay the federal share of these feasibility studies. My question for you today is, do you believe that Reclamation has sufficient funding to support these feasibility studies as well as other feasibility studies marked up by the Energy and Natural Resources Committee?
Senator, I think that we can find the cash to do those feasibility studies, and I want to commend you, quite frankly, for introducing legislation to do feasibility studies as opposed to jumping ahead and trying to authorize a project without the benefit of feasibility studies.
Yeah, eventually I think we need to go back to what we had where we combined two parts of it together, and that would save probably a couple years in the development of some of these projects, but we want to make sure that we do it correctly. Thank you, sir. And then finally, Mr. Cameron, Section 120 of the House Transportation and Infrastructure Committee reported Water Resources Development Act, or the WRDA, contains a concerning provision. This is the one that's in the House. It contains a concerning provision that prohibits the diversion of water from the Missouri River or any of its tributaries to a state outside of the watershed unless such diversion is approved by the governor of each of the Missouri River states, in effect granting veto authority to a single state over water projects in the region. And my question for you is, how would the adoption of this provision impact existing and future Indian water rights settlements? And does the Bureau of Reclamation have concerns about this specific provision?
Senator, we're always concerned about any situation where the Congress would seem to inject itself into state water law administration. We think that's a high-risk proposition, both for Indians and non-Indians. So that's a concern. On its face, it would seem that were that provision to become law, it would at least create an awkward relationship among those various governors and probably slow down economic activity across the board in all of those states, as they might be tempted into a tit-for-tat exercise.
I recognize that downstream states would be concerned about upstream states on the Missouri, perhaps sending water or selling water to other states way outside the region. My concern is that, number one, I'm not sure that we should have a veto authority, but second of all, if there is any reason that items that are on the Missouri River Basin, that there's other ways to work this out. And furthermore, I'm thinking in particular about some of the projects that we've already done that include states like Minnesota, who may not be considered part of the, they're only a few miles away from the Missouri, but they may not be considered part of that watershed. I have concerns about that, and I just wanted to draw it to your attention, and that perhaps there's another alternative that might work better than the legislation that's found within the House itself today.
Yeah, thank you for bringing that to our attention, Senator. We were aware of it, and we have some real concerns about it.
Thank you. Thank you, Madam Chair.
Rounds. Senator Lujan.
Thank you, Madam Chair, and welcome to our two chairmen here today, to our councilwoman. Thank you for taking time to travel today and to help everyone understand the importance and urgency of what needs to happen at home. Secretary Cameron, thank you for being here as well, and I'd be remiss if I did not acknowledge and thank you for your support in releasing the $120 million for the Navajo-Gallup pipeline settlement as well. Thank you for your work in that space, and I very much appreciate that the administration has provided testimony today supporting a piece of legislation that I have, which is a simple technical fix to the Aamodt Litigation Settlement Act as well. As you're aware, the problem is a hard June 30th, 2028 deadline in current law that the Interior Solicitor says could force construction to a halt, even though every party at the table wants the opposite. The legislation, Senate Bill 3573, supports the settlement parties and would allow them to agree jointly on a new completion date. With precedent settlements like the Navajo-Gallup, it adds no cost to the federal government. It simply allows construction to continue. The bill is supported by all four pueblos, Santa Fe County and the state of New Mexico. And Madam Chair, I have some letters from those entities to enter into the record. I appreciate it. Secretary Cameron, I just want to confirm your support.
Senator, absolutely. We're very happy to support these technical amendments to the Aamodt legislation. It makes an awful lot of sense, and I appreciate your leadership in trying to help make it happen.
I appreciate that. I urge the committee to move forward with this bill, 3573, and want to acknowledge Senator Martin Heinrich, our senior senator from New Mexico, with his work on the legislation as well. Now, Mr. Cameron, with all the conversation today, there's been a lot of attention brought to the number of pending water rights settlements. There are 39 enacted Indian water rights settlements binding federal commitments to tribal communities, but no guaranteed funding source for any of the settlement that were enacted after 2021. My legislation, Protecting Indian Water Rights Settlements Act 4890, fixes that by creating two dedicated sub-accounts within the completion fund. The first, a $250 million a year for new and continuing settlements, and $45 million a year for ongoing operations and maintenance obligations. As has been expressed by colleagues on both sides of the aisle, this is about keeping our word as the United States government to our tribal brothers and sisters, to our First Nations, as required by treaties and by the Constitution, water that they were promised. Mr. Cameron, your testimony notes that the department relies on Congress to appropriate the funds necessary to reach enforceability through the annual budget process. But your testimony testimony also references the $13 billion in pending settlement obligations that the annual appropriations process has not kept pace with. The Indian Water Rights Settlement Completion Fund itself, as we know, is now exhausted. Given that, does Interior believe a dedicated mandatory funding stream, like the one in 4890, is a better vehicle than relying on annual discretionary appropriations, or does the department have a different mechanism in mind?
Senator, again, I want to reiterate my appreciation for your commitment to trying to solve a really thorny problem here. And, we appreciate that very much. As a matter of policy, though, the administration does prefer to deal with these very real obligations the United States has through the appropriations process. So that is where we are coming out. That having been said, we're the Congress to pass a bill and the President sign it to produce a stream of mandatory spending, we'd be very happy to implement the law.
I appreciate it, Mr. Secretary. And Madam Chair, as you pointed out with some of our predecessors on the committee who sought support from the custom user fees, I have a separate piece of legislation that mirrors this. It's been referred to the Finance Committee that also points to customer user fees. So to the point of Secretary Cameron and yourself, Senator Schatz, trying to find a solution here as we're all working towards that. With that, Secretary Cameron, does Interior have a view on whether a bill of this size needs an identified pay-for to move, or would the department support this committee advancing new mandatory funding for settlements without one?
So at the very highest level, we're obviously interested in managing the size of the growing federal deficit. So anything that can be done to reduce the financial exposure to the American taxpayers at large is worth considering. We haven't taken a position on specific pay-fors. I look forward to seeing how the administration testifies on your bill pending before the Finance Committee. But I'm not in a position to offer an opinion on a particular pay-fors at this point.
I appreciate that. And Madam Chair, as my time's expired here, I've been part of conversations in the past to try to understand the accounting when it comes to what counts as a pay-for and what creates a pay-for, what creates a pay-for and what will take away from a pay-for, and how that can be utilized. And some have suggested that if the United States is addressing liabilities that the United States has, that creates pay-fors. And so the way that I look at this, all these water settlements create a pay-for everything else that everyone else wants to do. Now, I know that that's one person's view of accounting with the federal government, but it should be on the table. As all the smart people in the room, I would challenge you all to help me understand what I just talked about in a way that does that hold water or not? Is this one of those tools that maybe could be used in that way? So I thank you all for the time.
Thank you, Senator. One would think that we make that determination. Sometimes it's that black hole in OMB. But you have put something out there on the table for us all to think about. And I appreciate that you are really looking to explore different ways that we meet our commitment to our trust responsibility for these water settlements. Senator Armstrong.
Thank you. Is owed $136 million, and nobody disagrees with that, except there's no funding for it. And that I fundamentally agree with your point. If we owe money, and we shouldn't be talking about if you owed me money and you told me, well, wait a second, I have to go back to my wife and figure this out, how I'm going to pay you. I would say, tough, you owe me the money. So I fully support you on that, and I appreciate that the First Nations here are probably really frustrated with those as answers. So I'm very sympathetic to that issue and think it deserves a good answer. So thanks for raising that. And so back on the Yavapai-Apache water settlement, I'm really confused over if we know we're overbuilding it, and yet we know that there's water right claims that the tribe has. How did we get there? How did we get to a point where we all agree we're overbuilding it, and yet we're not following through with the obligation to provide the water rights for the tribe? So, Mr. Cameron, if you could respond to that.
So the department had not signed off on the notion that the project, that the capacity should be 40% bigger than what we thought the need is.
Okay.
You know, the various parties, state, local government, and the tribe have come up with their proposal on their own, and this is the first time this administration has been able to testify on the bill. The previous administration, I think, expressed some similar concerns about the price tag and the size and potential oversize of the project. So that's how we ended up here.
So, and maybe Chairman Rocha, to you, how did we, if I understand the tribe wanting to enforce its rights to have its claims on the water, but to the degree that the expansion of the project is what's holding it up, how do you, seems like you'd want to just get your water rights resolved and not worrying about all the other auxiliary needs that are kind of complicating the project. So can you respond to how we got there?
Thank you, Senator Armstrong. Great question. I believe that it's important that we continue to work together with the Department of Interior and understand more about these challenges that are being presented, rather than looking at it from what we've already garnered in these partnerships and understanding that there are some additional benefits to be gained from it. I think it's important that we come to the table, and as he had mentioned before about the feasibility, when we look at it from the feasibility aspect and look at the technical pieces of it, this would actually kind of help us understand about what is being discussed today. And through these technical feasibilities and getting to the cost associated to that, I think that's where these questions will be answered in terms of sizing. But I also, I'd also like to point out that are additional parties that could benefit from this and looking at what is currently happening within the Verde Valley right now with the depletion of water resources across the entire Verde Valley. This is going to be something that is going to be critical for the survival. Right now we have 3 municipal wells across the Verde Valley, including Camp Verde and Clarkdale right now, that are in dire need of having to go deeper into the water system and aquifers. And this is concerning because we're all connected to the same aquifer. So, I think when we look at it and from the perspective of what's happening underneath the groundwater and trying to preserve what's there and try to replenish it, this is going to be critical.
Great. So just to follow up on that then, you would agree that it's reasonable for the United States to say, hey, we only owe you for this amount of water rights on the one hand, but on the other hand, there's a total community need that needs to be addressed, and that's what leads you to wanting to make sure that the project is adequate to serve the whole valley?
I think it's important that this technical feasibility that Mr. Cameron is talking about is necessary for us to reassess, overall and continue to work together collaboratively about identifying what Mr. Cameron has identified as a challenge or concern from the federal government.
Okay, very good. Thank you very much. Yield my time.